Nope. Whoops. Gotta do Twitch. Chat. Ah. It looks like I'm live now. I'm just checking to make sure I'm actually streaming on Twitch. Alright, what is up everybody? Today we're going to be working on... My dogs are playing in the background. I'm going to be working on a new track. I was working on an old one here with my live streams, and I kind of lost the project file due to kind of an issue. It was something I did that was really stupid with Dropbox. But it's okay. I think this track's going to be better anyway. Or at least I'm going to tell myself that so I don't feel as bad. So let me play the melody that I have right now, and I'll kind of show you how I made it. So basically there's only two things going on right now. There's this, I have a Virus TI2 patch that is, that I've recorded down to audio, and I'll let you take a listen to that. And I also have a silent patch, which is a little bit more plucky. So let me go ahead and play the whole thing. And then it kind of repeats, and maybe I'll add a little bit of variation. First of all, I want to make sure... Oh, darn it. Well, maybe I'll open up Facebook. That way, if people are chatting with me on Facebook, at least then I can respond to comments. And, of course, people on Twitch as well. Let's see. Oops. Hopefully I get these notifications. Alright, I'll just have that ready to go. Okay, cool. So yeah, going back to the track, let me show you the two, because it's only two pieces, and they both come together, both of these layers come together, because they both serve a very important purpose. So this is sort of the pluck lead from Silent. And this is kind of a modified patch called this back lead JOC, like John O'Callaghan. Wait, yeah, like JOC, like John O'Callaghan. And really it's just the stock delay and reverb. Later on I will put my own delay and reverb on it. Here come the dogs again. But for now I just like the way this sounded, and I was really just I made the melody, and I wanted to make the melody because that part can be kind of boring without watching just trial and error. So I want to get a melody down first, and then now we can do all the processing. So once again, we'll come back to that later. And then the other sound is this Virus TI2, so that's what, let me take a listen to what this sounds like. So this is that. So actually a really nice sound. I'm really loving this new hardware synth, the Virus that I have. Little bit of processing, just a slight dip in the mids. I was finding it to get a little bit peaky there, so I just took out a little around 728 hertz. Then of course delay and reverb. But this is what's really interesting. It's hard to know what these sounds are going to sound like in context without any of these. So for instance, if we listen to this just completely dry, doesn't really sound like much. And even with the EQ, it doesn't sound like much either, in my opinion. Except just a little less mid-heavy. But as soon as we add the reverb and the delay, you'll hear it really comes to life, especially this reverb, this Arts Acoustic reverb. And then now I'm putting the delay after the reverb, and actually, really, in most cases, it doesn't matter. People will try to tell you, oh, if you put the delay after the reverb, then it's going to add delay to the reverb sound. But it pretty much, both of these are linear devices, which means the order of these doesn't matter. So that's kind of why I have it this way. It really doesn't matter. In fact, I think it would sound the same either way. So once again, not too much going on. So I didn't notice a difference between both of those. So that's that. Cool. So let's get back to maybe what I'll do now is Missy, shut up. Okay. Anyway, going back, let's go ahead and add a sub bass because I think I used to always do a kick first and then find a sub bass, but I actually think it's better to do it the other way around. Because with your sub bass, once you have a melody, you know exactly what key you need your track to be in, and you can make the sub bass, and then from there it's easier to match a kick sample because you have tons of those to your sub bass sound. So let's go ahead and do that. And I actually have a couple favorites that I like using. So patches, instruments, and this is probably one of my favorites. Atom Sub. And if I take a listen, it's not going to sound like much now. So once again, a lot of different harmonics here that probably aren't going to be necessary since this is only going to be a sub bass. Let me go ahead and route this to a mixer track. And there's a certain amount of processing that I like doing just directly on this, and I'll show you what that is. Oops. Here it is. And I'm going to do Atom Sub A sharp, and I'll walk through what each of these pieces are that I've kind of refined. But really is what I should mention here is this is really just sawtooth waves. There's really nothing else going on. Sawtooth and pulse waves. And then what it goes through, what I like doing is taking the sound and taking out all the high ends, so you'll hear what this sounds like. Starting to sound a little bit more subby. Then it goes through waves R bass, and I'm actually going to adjust this in a little bit. Now if you're listening to this on laptop speakers or something, you probably won't notice a difference, or maybe even be able to hear that. But where I'm sitting, where I have a sub here, it actually makes a huge difference. And then finally another EQ to boost whatever the fundamental is. And maybe I won't boost it that much, but cool. So now what I want to do is build a sub bass around the melody, and the key we're in is E minor. So what I'm going to do is just really follow the chord progression that I have kind of laid out here, and I've enabled ghost notes so we can really see it. So I think that's too low down here, so I think this E3 works. So I'm going to start with an offbeat bass line, and maybe I'll change it later, but really the point shut up, or you're going to go in your crate, okay? Shush. But really the point right now is just sketching out the idea and getting kind of the main sound in place, and then from there we can do all sorts of processing later. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this sound, I'm just going to follow the... And so we're going to start on the E, and this A is too low, so I'm actually going to bring it up an octave. Really nice sounding note. And then it goes up to, I believe, a B. So this is where it gets tricky. Which one do we do? I actually think that higher one sounds a little better to me. And then we repeat this with a few more changes. So here's this part, of course the same. Then it drops down to the D. And rather than an A, this actually goes to a C. So now we got to decide this or this. I actually think going up is going to be the best move here. This C is pretty low. If we think about what frequency this is probably below 35 hertz, maybe around 35 hertz. So maybe a little too low for most systems to reproduce. And plus, I think it's interesting having it go really deep and then kind of jumping back up. It's almost like in hip hop where you hear the 808 kind of doing these things. It'd be really interesting. And then with this, I think I'm going to go back down, but let's take a listen. So that's a really tricky one because both of those, in my opinion, don't sound that good. But I'm going to just stay with the lower one, and then we'll go back to the B, which we'll want up here, and that sounds really nice. So that's pretty much the sub line. So if I play it with the melody, that's sounding good. Is what I want to do is make sure that this note on the E is the one that's sounding the best because that's the main key of the track. And that's going to be the note that's playing the most often, both in the chord progression and also in the intro and outro. So I'm going to adjust, I'm actually going to loop this section and I'm going to solo the sub and I'm just going to adjust the R bass and the equalizer to that note. So I'm boosting the fundamental here, which is around 43 hertz, and cutting down the actual first harmonic because sometimes I found this is a trick I learned from James Diamond. Sometimes that allows the fundamental to breathe a little bit more, especially in a low frequency instrument like this. So I'm liking the way that that is sounding, and I'm pretty happy with it. So what I may actually do is take this time now to kind of create almost a, well, we can do the arrangement in a little bit, but what I want to do now is kind of create a version of this sub bass for the intro where it's just playing that E. So I'm going to copy that over into a new pattern. And if you notice here, this project, unlike the last time, it's nothing that's been routed at all, and we'll be doing all that routing, which I guess can be kind of boring, but hopefully it's informative. One of the things I do want to do, I want to mute this. Just that way, in case I unmute this channel, it's there. In fact, I may just delete that because that wasn't playing anyway. I have the dry version, and then I've recorded those effects on there. And when picking those sounds, that can be actually really tricky because you heard the difference between the dry and the wet sound of that reverb, and that can be really challenging to know what it's going to sound like. So sometimes it helps to have delay and reverb on your channel beforehand, or when you're going through synth presets, because a lot of synths have delay and reverb built in, especially software ones. Keep your delay and reverb on your channel off and go through the presets, and once you found one that you like, take the delay and reverb off, listen to what it sounds like, and then put your own delay and reverb that you plan on using on. That way you can get the sound that you want. And it's better to use your own because all of these different instruments may have different reverb types and different delays, so it's better to be able to group them together. Now right now I'm not grouping them together because this is going through its own delay and reverb on the channel. But we'll fix that later when we start actually doing some processing on the lead instruments. So generally the way the structures work is we start the sub at bar 33. Whoops. So I may just like bring that in here, and we can deal with the melody in a little bit because it's not what I'm concerned with right now. So if we listen to it, now is where we want to find a kick that's going to work well with this lead sound. So what I'm going to do, or sorry, the sub bass. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go into the samples and I'm going to try to find just one that's just kind of really basic sound to be routing everything up. So that doesn't sound terrible. Let me go ahead and rename this. And I'm going to give it a color. I'm always pretty particular about organizing everything because you'll see as this track builds up, we'll probably have over 100 different tracks going on, or close to that, maybe 80. And it's really important to be organized in these cases because otherwise it can get cluttered, and when you get to that point, it's almost too late. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a new pattern for the kick, and this is going to be just very simple, just straight quarter notes on the right note. Oops. Actually, as well, just do this. And let's place that with the sub. So, the goal right now is to try to find a kick sample that works well with the sub instrument. So we can try different ones, as what I'm going to be doing is just auditioning different ones here. So a lot of these have a lot of bass, and I'll be doing the processing a little bit later, but what I'm really trying to find is a kick that has both a really nice top end and also the low end that's going to match well with the sub. It doesn't necessarily always have to be in the same key. Some people are really particular about that. I'm not necessarily. I think it can sound fine sometimes at a fifth or otherwise, but a lot of times when these kick drums are synthesized, the key doesn't really matter as much, especially if you're cutting the sample off before it really has time to have a big tail. But in other genres, like big room and other EDM subgenres, you actually do want to tune your kick because it can be really clashing with your other instruments. So maybe what I'll do is I'll go here to this Dave Parkinson pack. There's usually a bunch of good stuff in here. I have so many kick drums, it's just unreal. And I don't know, maybe something kind of techy. So not really finding anything in there that I think is appropriate for the vibe that I'm wanting to go for. A lot of those are great samples. They're just not really what I'm looking for right now. That's more like it. I may try a few more, but I like this number one. Go with number one. I really like the way that's sounding. One of the things I want to do here is I don't want these two overlapping, because when it comes to this low end information, the frequency is so low and thus the wavelength is so big that these overlapping bass frequencies or sub bass frequencies can cause severe phase cancellations where your bass can actually disappear for a decent amount of time. And we don't want that, so generally I try to only keep one sub instrument playing at a time. I'm not necessarily using that as like a hard and fast rule that I'm always going to be following, but generally as a rule of thumb. So one of the things I can do is I can go here to the sample properties and actually adjust the time using this hold amount to see how long we want this to play. And now what I'm going to do is just put a little bit of EQ on there. I think that's sounding better too. And I'm going to try to level it to about -9 dB. And maybe I'll try some compression on here, but I'm not sure. I'm actually liking the way it's sounding now, so maybe this won't be necessary. I'm going to use a pretty gentle ratio. The attack time, I'm going to turn it down a little bit because we want that initial click to come through. And let's take a listen. So I'm aiming for about 2 dB of gain reduction, which we're seeing here. I'm not sure if you can hear it, but to me it really brings out the transient. It's almost like putting a transient processor on there to kind of bring out the attack. So it's really letting a lot more high end through. So I may keep that, and I might just leave it that way for now. I think I'm happy with the way it's sounding. The last thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to route this kick and sidechain it to the sub. I'm just going to hear what that sounds like. So what that's going to do, it's going to be a compressor on the sub bass channel, but the compressor is going to be triggered by the kick drum coming in. So whenever the kick hits or whenever its volume is up, it's actually going to drop the level of the sub bass down. Let me check really quick, make sure I don't have any comments or anything. Not seen any. Too bad I didn't get this restream chat working. That's too bad. But I'll do that next time. So what I'm going to do is put a simple limiter or a fruity limiter on here. These internal FL plugins, if you're using FL Studio, actually allow you to kind of do all this routing, I guess, inside the plugin, which is kind of interesting. It's just a little bit hard to know where these things are if you've never done it before. So I'm going to route this kick to the sub, but I don't want any volume coming through. So I'm going to turn this down. So what this means is the signal is being sent to this track, but no audio signal is being sent. It's just the signal is going to be available for any processors that need it. So in this limiter, I'm going to go to compression, and I'm going to sidechain it to the kick. And now you can see this is where the sub is, but when I bring the threshold down, the kick is hitting in this blue line. It's very hard to see, but let me turn the ratio up. So now what I want to do is mix the level of the sub to the kick. And one of the things I like doing too, although you definitely want to rely on your ears and not your eyes when you're mixing, is I like putting this spectrum analyzer called Span on the master. I'm going to set it to high res mode. You can see the kick's hitting at about, here's maybe where the peak is, G1, so that's about a fifth up from where the sub is hitting it. Or no, not, sorry, that would have been if it was a C. So here's the E that the sub is hitting. And maybe what I'll do is, at this point, I'll make a kick and bass bus. So this is where the kick and bass are going to be routed to. And I'll simply, instead of routing the kick to the master, I'm going to route it to this kick and bass bus. And same thing with the sub. And now this track is routed to the master. So now any processing I do on this channel is going to be applied to both the kick and the sub, because the audio is going through these channels, and instead of going directly out to the master, they're going into this kick and bass bus, which is then being sent out to the master. And at this point, I'm probably not going to do much more with this, with these two channels, because I'm liking the way that that's sounding, and I think it's coming through pretty well. So now would be a good time to start working on the structure. And one of the things I think is worth doing in these kind of cases is sometimes it's helpful to have a reference track. Now, I don't always do this, but I think kind of for illustrative purposes, it's pretty helpful to see how you would take a track that's already there and kind of use it, not to copy it, but to kind of get the arrangement down, or at least sketch the arrangement, and then you can go back and change it later. Comment? Oh, nice. Nice, we got people watching. This is great. So let's go ahead and go back here, and what I want to do is Totally forgot what I was doing. Oh yeah, structure. I think I have a pack of these that I was planning on using as reference, and it must be somewhere else. I wanted to use this track called Turbo. It's by Sean Tyas. Let's see if I can find it. I know I have it on this computer, at least in my DJ library. If not, oh, here it is. Cool. And here it is in reference tracks. So I'm just going to bring it in here, and we'll find out what tempo it is. And I'm going to bring this up here and kind of, well, that's probably close enough. So one of the things you can notice right off the bat here is that this track is at a different tempo than where I'm at, which is 138. So I'm going to change this tempo, and it doesn't matter because I'm not really here to listen to it. I'm more here to just get the arrangement that's being used here. So I'm going to do this, and I'm going to say auto detect, and I actually am going to type in the BPM because I think it's actually 140. And sure enough, that looks about right to me. If I'm wrong, I can always go back later. Yeah, so you can see all these kind of, I'm just eyeballing these transitions. I mean, as a DJ, I look at these waveforms like all the time. So I'm like, have a lot of experience just kind of picking out where these sections are. So to kind of match, the idea here is to match the kind of kick with all of this stuff going on. So the kick is pretty much going all throughout here. And I like using these markers here in FL just to, just to kind of, I guess, help organize it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say time markers. I'm going to add one here at the beginning. It's going to be song. This is where the song starts. Then at bar 33 is when the sub comes in. Then this is when the breakdown starts. And then let's take a listen. And let me actually turn this down. So this is going to be the main drop, and I think this is when the actual synth comes in. So this is like synths open, that's what I'll call it, because the cutoff on the synthesizers are open. And maybe I'll mark here that this is when the synths come in, but I'm not sure if I want to keep that. This is going to be the start of the outro. And this is when the song ends here, bar 249. So you can actually look, by looking here at the waveform, you can kind of see where all these elements come in and kind of where they don't. So you can kind of see where the kick comes in here, it comes in filtered, then it comes in full, then the sub comes in, then none of that, then this part's a little bit nebulous. Then the kick and sub, of course, for the main section, but that sub is going to be following the chord progression, so I'm going to bring this in over here. And then it's going to happen again. Then the outro starts, and I wonder if the sub stops here. And I should do it. Yep. So obviously these things are clashing a little bit, but that's okay. Just bring that on over here, and I want to just check to make sure that at this point, so this is actually a kick roll. So I may set myself up for that. Put the pattern here, make it unique, call this kick roll, and I'm not really going to be doing too much with this right now. But and then maybe here it'll be twice as fast. Whoops. That's a lot more than twice as fast. You want 16th notes, like that. Cool. So again, haven't played with the velocities, haven't really done anything there. And now is where we get to kind of have a little bit of fun with where we want these instruments to be. So for instance, if you look here on the reference track, you're seeing the kick hitting every downbeat, and then it misses a beat here. And that's really common, almost like a little mini fill that you see in certain tracks. So what I'll do is I'll just take out that kick. Here it's actually, I think it drops out the last couple bars. Let's take a listen. It's like a mini roll. So, I don't know if I'll copy that or not, but I'm going to make this unique. And I'm just going to call this mini roll. Notice how here I'm not trying to copy the exact structure or the exact patterns that are being used. I'm just instead trying to use this as a guide to kind of building these together. Here there are 2 beats where the kick doesn't come in. Following along, here's probably another mini roll. So I may grab this one, but also there's a good chance I'll come back here and make this one different. Looks like that's going to be another different mini roll. So I'll just have that here. Then the kick comes out. The main kick roll here for the build-up. Once again, note this last bar doesn't have any kicks, which kind of makes sense. So this block of 16 bars here, it's kind of signaling that there's a change coming, and then the second half of the drop comes in. So most of the time in uplifting trance, you'll find that these drops are generally 32 bars of kick and sub, and then the last 16 bars, the kick is kind of filtering out, and it's kind of almost like a bridge that moves into the outro. So if we listen here, this is the division between the first 16 bars and the second 16 bars when things are added. Maybe I'll start it back here. So you can kind of hear how that works. And then once again, maybe another fill. Once again, kick rolls all over the place. Really nice way to add energy and spice up the track without having to add a lot. I don't want to say make a lot of work, because we're not trying to be lazy, but it's just a way you can use the instruments that you have without having to add too many different sounds that could potentially muddy up your mix or just kind of cause things to be cluttered. And instead you're using the elements that you have and kind of using them in a more simple way, keeping the actual number of elements more simple, but using them in a more creative way to add energy and keep things interesting. So yeah, that's kind of how I wanted to structure this for now. Once again, this is a mini roll. So maybe is what I'll do is have these do 8 notes. Actually, I'm going to keep this one the way it was. And actually, it doesn't really matter how I do it because I come back later to do it. And now these are going to be 16th notes. Now, one of the things you have to be careful of when doing this is these kick drums can actually overlap. So let's take a listen to what this sounds like. I'm actually not hearing it too much, but just kind of to see how we can fix that, there's this button, cut itself, and basically what that means is when the sample triggers again, it'll stop the previous one from playing. So let's say I turn that off. In my opinion, it just makes things sound tighter. It's kind of already doing that, but when I do this, maybe it's best to just hear it here. And we'll play with the velocities. And I am thinking that these last 2 bars, I do want them to be even faster, just a little bit, like that, just to kind of really add that energy. And of course, we'll be playing around with this too. And generally at this point, I kind of like to slowly bring things down. So it kind of has this energy dip, and this kind of tails off, leading right into when the sub comes in. So once again, we just got the first 4 bars, so I'm going to just take this standard 4-on-the-floor kick drum, shorten it, and place it right in the hole, and there we go. So I'm a fan of how that's coming along. Now is what we can do is we can start using the arrangement of the track to kind of layer this out. So I'm going to go over here and I'm going to grab Volcano 2. I'm going to open this one all the way. And the first thing I need to make sure is that this isn't actually affecting the sound when it's open all the way. So the best thing to do is we put it here. And I'm not sure, maybe clean is the best way to do it. Even though this should be all the way out here at, I don't know what frequency this is, 75,000 hertz. I'm not telling a difference there, so that's good enough for me. I'm using two filters. The first one's going to be a low pass, and the second one's going to be a high pass. I'm not hearing anything there either, which is good, because we want these filters to be completely transparent when they're actually not engaged, and then we're able to just kind of sweep the sound around. Just kind of like you would on a DJ mixer. So I'm going to create an automation clip. Actually, before I do that, so what I want to do is I'm going to set this up as an instrument track with the kick. The reason I want to do it this way is now whenever I create automation clips for this channel, there's a new feature in FL, I think 20 or 20.5, they're going to be linked to this kick drum, so I don't have to be playing, organization with the actual playlist, because organizing automation clips in the playlist is actually kind of a bit of a pain. The other thing I'm going to do is I may actually do the same thing for the master. And the reason for this, even though this is an audio track for the master, anything I put here will not only be routed directly to the master, but all the master automation should be grouped to this track, which is exactly what I want. So anyway, going back here, let's go ahead and automate the filter to cutoff. In fact, I may make automation clips for everything, all of these four things right now. As tweaked, create automation clip. So there's filter 2 frequency. And I'm going to have to rename these because filter 2 doesn't mean anything to me. Sorry, that was cold. But what I mean by that is it doesn't matter. Filter 2, just telling me the number 2 doesn't mean much, but telling me it's a high-pass filter actually means a lot. But with Volcano, the reason they're not labeled that way is because you can actually choose what type they are. Same thing with this low-pass filter. I'm going to create a track for the cutoff and a track for the resonance, or also known as the peak. And I'm actually just going to rename this. I'm going to say kick, or maybe I'll just say high pass. I'm going to just call this cutoff. Same thing here. That's reso, that's cutoff, low pass, reso. So now that we've done that, and now what I want to do is actually name these clips as well, because otherwise makes it that color, which I'm not a huge fan of, but whatever. Now we can kind of go in here and start the first 16 bars with the kick high pass, which is very common. And one of the reasons we do this is this kind of makes the DJ's life even easier. I mean, trance isn't, I don't think, the hardest genre to mix, but because it's so melodic, it can be really challenging to get two tracks to mix well together that aren't in the same key. So that's why a lot of the more melodic information you won't hear coming in until much later, potentially even bar 65. I mean, you'll obviously know what key the track is in based on the sub bass and the bass line that's playing, but a lot of times it's even filtered out here, so you kind of get a chance to mix in. And even the kick sometimes is filtered for that reason. So if we take a listen here. And then it comes in. And let's listen to what it sounds like in the reference track. So in my opinion, you pretty much hear the exact same thing, where the kick starts out filtered, and then it kind of comes in, and then it's really, yeah, that's kind of how it works. And a lot of times with these kick rolls too, it makes sense to kind of bring the cutoff down on them as well. Here I'm using the low pass just to kind of keep things a little bit different and interesting. So and maybe this is also a good time to kind of bring the low end of the kick down and out. And one of the things things I'm noticing here, so with these mini rolls, I'm actually not having this last the whole 8 bars, so I'm going to bring that back here. Actually, the thing I should probably have done is just made this pattern, whatever. Actually, I'll do it the way I was planning on doing it in the first place, which is coming back here to this pattern and just adding this across the first 4 bars. That way, in case we do want to make it an 8-bar kick roll, we can do so. I think that's kind of what I had in mind initially. So this comes in. Once again, I'm not trying to be super picky because this is all stuff that'll kind of come together a little bit later. I think this is a good spot to start filtering it out. And notice I'm playing with the curve here of the automation. So sometimes I want it jumping, such as here, going from like the low pass coming down to jumping back in, and other times I kind of want it to be a little bit smoother. I think this is also a good place to have the high pass come in and just a slope like that. I'll probably have a roll here, something, but for now, not sure. And then once again, this is where the high pass filter comes back in. So I'm going to do that, and I'm actually going to keep it that way. And it doesn't really matter what's going on over here, but whatever. And in fact, to do this is what I may actually do, is just cut this off. The reason I'm doing this is now all the automation clips that I make will be this long and won't be necessarily extending past the length of the song, even though we may go back in there and change that later. Now, instead of directly controlling the velocity of the kick drum with these velocity patterns, I could also do it with an automation clip. And I actually think I may add that just kind of for the sake of making things a little bit, I don't know, a little bit better. So I'm going to just do that. I'm going to add a fruity balance clip. I like copying this so that way the maximum it can ever go is 0 dB. So if I paste this maximum value in here, now when I drag this up all the way to the top, it's going to be hitting that maximum value at 0 dB. So now is what I can be doing at any other sections in the song without having to go into the pattern and changing the individual velocities. I can use this kick volume to kind of adjust the I guess, what am I trying to say? Adjust the volume of the kick drum without having to change the individual velocities like I was just saying. Yeah. So that would be a good place actually, just to say, maybe here, maybe make the single curves, oops. I'm noticing here is these velocities are about 80%, whereas with these mini rolls, they're not starting at 80%. So I want to go ahead and fix that. So just go down here and straight line across all the way up to 80%. So that's sounding good. So maybe at this point it would be good to sort of make an 8-bar percussion loop that will be playing. I'm going to make it here at bar 33, but then we can, once we add all the elements we want to add, we can kind of go back and change that later. So some of the things we're going to want to have just kind of for, I guess, samples. We're going to want an open hat, a clap, maybe some snares for snare rolls, but that may come in later. Some hi-hats, I think I mentioned that, closed hi-hats, ride, cymbals, and any sort of other loops and fills that we can think of. Just kind of interesting stuff to fill out the upper end of the track, because one of the things you'll notice here is most of the time your melody is going to sit going up here, maybe even to 15K, maybe to 18K, but there may not be a lot of information in that upper register. So the percussion really fills out that top end of the frequency spectrum, as well as some of the mids if you're adding toms and other sorts of percussion elements like that. So let's go ahead and find maybe a clap. Claps I'm actually pretty picky with, because I like the pretty big ones. I like this one. This is from the Vengeance Essential Club Sounds Volume 1. And generally I like using two claps and kind of layering them, because that's one way you can kind of get a unique sound by blending the sound of two different claps together, rather than just using one that you found out of a sample pack. So if we take a listen. Maybe this is a good one too. Maybe I'll bring this in as, whoops. It's going to be clap 2. And of course give this an icon and everything like that. And now I'm going to just make a pattern called clap. And basically we're going to just be putting these on the offbeats like this. And going in, actually I shouldn't have done what I did, because I'm going to copy this anyway. Copy this down here. Cool. So this hasn't been mixed at all. Oops. Bring this in. So now is the time we get to actually mix this. So what I want to do is assign this to a new instrument track. And I'm going to start by routing this to the same track, but if I don't like the way that that's sounding, then I may change my mind and route them to different tracks. But I'm hoping I can do all the processing together. So let's first find the balance between these two. That sounded pretty good to me. Once again, the volume is way too loud for both of them, but we can adjust that with this. Next thing is some basic equalization. And one of the things you'll find, and I'm always doing this, is pretty much all elements that aren't the kick and the sub are going to be high-passed around 200 hertz, unless it's something else that has some low-mid information, but definitely at the very least 100 hertz, because we don't want anything interfering with the sub and the kick. So let's take a listen to where we should find this cutoff. And one of the things I may do as well, I may add a compressor to try to glue these sounds together. It may not need it, so I'm not super tied to the idea of using this, but just to kind of see if it helps. I don't think it needs it. I really don't think it does. In addition to this, I may add this Mag EQ4, which is one of my favorite plugins. And I like using this to kind of really bring in the top end. So, in fact, I may like that more than this. And I might adjust the envelopes on these a little bit later. For instance, I like the way this sounds, but it may almost be too, I may want it to taper off a little bit. We'll see, maybe later I'll add some reverb. And the last thing I want to do, I'm going to pan these just slightly left and right, just kind of fill out the stereo field. I believe both of them probably have stereo information anyway, but this really helps kind of separate them even more. So at this point, maybe is what I'll do is I'll add a closed hat. And I usually like adding multiple ones, but for now we'll start with one. Closed hat one, just gonna give this a color. Gonna put that here. Actually, this clap should be on this instrument channel. And now I'm gonna take this closed hi-hat and I may start with a pattern. Well, actually, let's see. I may want to play with these velocities. Let's see what that sounds like. I like the way that's sounding, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to duplicate this across these 8 bars. And I like working in these kind of 8-bar chunks, if you haven't noticed, just because it kind of helps piece things together. Because I always want to be changing something at least every 8 bars. So this helps me visually take a step back and say, what am I adding, what am I taking away at each of these steps? And I mean, we haven't really done much of that yet. But if you look at some of my tracks, you'll see there's almost this like V shape as things are being added and taken away. Or maybe you'll see mini Vs where you can pretty much see every 8 bars something new is happening, something different is happening. It really just adds a lot. So I'm going to start with this pattern, but I also think sometimes it's fun to hit this quantize tool. Now some people are probably thinking, it's already quantized, it's already on the grid. Well, this will allow me to pick like swung notes or other grooves that you can choose that aren't necessarily the ones that we have. And I can also play with the velocities a little bit too. So once again, this is nice. What you can see here is that it's actually adjusted both the timing of some of these notes and also the velocities just ever so slightly. And this helps to add a slight movement and keeping things from sounding too static and too robotic. I mean, as a genre, trance tends to sound very repetitive, and I mean that in a good way, in kind of almost a comforting, hypnotic way, but that shouldn't be an excuse for things to sound like boring. And not that I'm saying that straight eighths are necessarily boring, but it's kind of fun to experiment with different ways you can try to add, I guess, make things a little bit more interesting if you want to, especially from a production standpoint. So I'm also going to assign this to an instrument track, but it's not really necessary. In fact, what I'll do here is I'm going to make this a percussion sort of sub-mix in the playlist. Once again, this won't really have anything on it per se, but it's just kind of for grouping together the percussion that isn't the kick drum when wanting to collapse all of them when I'm not working on. Cool. And one of the things I'll do before I do much of anything else, in fact, I'll probably put this over here. So I'm going to create a percussion bus. Just that way, if there isn't any processing we want to do, we can do it on the entire bus channel. So I'm going to create a percussion bus. And I want to give it a nice little icon that lets me know that it's being fed these channels. And sometimes I like doing this, adding a separator here, so we just know where this ends. So route to this track only, route to this track only. And one of the things I forgot to do here, and maybe I'll come in here and use this randomize tool, is rather than randomizing the velocities, which is another way you can do it, I like randomizing the pan, just so that they kind of bounce around a little bit. So that's nice. And another thing sometimes it's worth doing too is coming in here and grabbing Fruity Pan-O-Matic or anything else that you can use to kind of pan your hi-hats rhythmically across the stereo field. So I should have like panematic or something that, there's probably another word for this that I'm just forgetting right now. Here we go. Okay, so I'm gonna just like pan, and I'm gonna choose the amount. So what this is going to be doing is ever so slightly bouncing the hi-hats from left to right, but kind of rhythmically. So it's going to be sweeping left to right so slightly, and then within each individual note, it's going to be kind of panned slightly as well, so that it's not just, you're getting this sort of micro movement of each individual hitting at different places along the stereo field, along with the macro movement of the hi-hats across the stereo field as well, which I think just keeps things really interesting as just as the track goes along. So the next thing we'll find is an open hi-hat. So I like using these 909 sounding ones. I think these are really important to have in your tracks. That one sounds pretty good. Let's go ahead and use that. So I'm going to drag this in here to create a new sampler channel. Give it a nice icon and call this open hat. And usually I don't layer these, or at least I don't layer them in the traditional sense that I don't pick out two open hi-hats. I think sometimes that can distract from the sound of it, just kind of personal preference, I guess. But sometimes I do like layering it with some other random stuff. Maybe it's a shaker, or I don't know what else is remember another closed hat, just to kind of really give it an extra attack. So I will assign this to an instrument track as well, and we want this here with the percussion. And same with this buddy. And of course, just like usual, we want these on the offbeats. So I'm going to do that. And then we go in here, okay. Duplicate that. And somehow I screwed this up. I don't know how I did that. How did I screw it up? Somehow that guy got screwed up. Well, anyway, I'm going to quantize it. Sounding pretty good right out of the box. One of the things I may do is put the EQ on there and just, oops, I pass. Just take out all that low end that we don't want anyway. A little boost there. And same thing with this close hat. I do want to actually add a little bit of EQ to do the same thing, because once again, we don't want any of that low information. And another thing I may put a transient designer on here, just so that we can really bring the transient out. Sounding good. And the next thing I want to do is I want to add this is a trick I learned from Adam Ellis, this SSL EQ. And this basically is what it'll do, is it will add a lot of coloring to your sound. It's very similar to the Mag EQ, but it has this, has this hi-hat preset that's just fantastic. Here it is. thing I'll do, I might just add a little bit of fade out. Just to kind of shape the sound a little bit. Cool, so that's sounding good. At this point, maybe usually once I do the open hat, I like adding a ride that can kind of go along with it. I like having rides on the offbeats as well. So this is a straight up just a 909 ride cymbal from the 909 drum kit. And I like the way it sounds so much, I might just use this one and just do a little bit of processing on it. So let's once again create a new pattern. And I realize all this stuff, it's happening slow probably because A, I'm explaining it, but also just because this is the kind of attention to detail you're going to need when you're actually creating your track that's going to be well produced, unless you're having somebody else mix it. But it's always good to know how to do this yourself, even if you don't want to do it, because having the knowledge to be able to make a track like this and the dedication and sort of the patience, I guess it's more of that than anything, is important when you're producing, because it makes you a better producer, and kind of being a perfectionist about it is really good. I mean, there's a balance, right, to not being too crazy that you never get anything done, but at the same time also making sure it's good enough that you're happy with the result and it's polished and other people are going to recognize the quality there. Once again, I'm going to assign this to an instrument track and route it just for organizational sakes. And one of the things I will say, all this stuff, all the routing that you're seeing, I have done in a template that I usually use. I just think it's confusing to see me working in a template where it's like, well, where's that coming from? And why does that happen this way? It's easier to see it when it's kind of being built and understand the way everything's kind of routed when it's being built up from scratch. So I put this here. Notice I'm doing the offbeats. And let's go ahead and take a listen. So I like panning this the other way, and the other thing I will do is do this cut self button. It's got a lot of low and low mid information that we, don't need, meant to hit high pass. Type. Here it is. So there's a particular resonant peak there that I think actually gives a lot of character to the cymbal, but at the same time I think it also could be a little bit harsh, which is why I'm just dipping it out ever so slightly. I like having it there because once again I think it adds to the body of the sound, but at the same time I don't know if it needs to be that loud. And one of the things I like doing with these hats is adding a little bit of reverb to them, although, and maybe I'll do that now, just ever so slightly, just to kind of have it there in the mix and it'll make it a little bit easier. And there's some people like, I know Drift Moon does this, where they will automate the amount of reverb throughout the track, which is pretty cool because reverb is one of those ways you can sort of push things back in the mix without having to necessarily play around with the volume. So just for the sake of it, I might just use the built-in Fruity Limiter 2, or sorry, Fruity Reverb 2. I might leave it like that. I'm not sure how much of a fan I am with the reverb on this particular sound, because it kind of has its own little, I guess, reverb sound to it, in my opinion, because of the way it was recorded when it was put in the drum machine, but Who knows? So at this point, I'm going to add another closed hi-hat because I think, while one is great, I think we can add more movement and keep things even more interesting by adding another one. So once again, I'm going to do this. And I'm going to start with this sample, but I may change which one we're doing later on. So there are a lot of ways you can a lot of fun you can have with these different patterns. First of all, I actually need to place it. And I may actually start by moving this across. So once again, just a little slight something to add some movement and something a little bit different than everything else going on. I'm probably not going to have this very loud in the mix, and I may later on decide that I don't want it at all. But for now, so one of the things I didn't mention here, I panned the open hat to the left, so I'm going to pan the ride to the right just to kind of balance that out. And with these closed hats, they're both panned slightly to the left. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to swap the left and right channel, so this new one, so it's kind of coming out of the right. Actually, this one's moving around, so it doesn't really matter where this is coming from. Let's listen to what these hats sound like together. And I may actually add a shaker as well, just to kind of see what this would sound like. And with this, it's going to be very, very simple. I'm going to do two, it's going to be on the offbeats, and two of them, just like this. And let's take a listen to what this would sound like if I, come back. That was to simply place it here and duplicate this. Kind of like I really like that. That was kind of an accident when I was clicking, but it sounded good to me, so I might do that. Once again, just slight movement, slight kind of building this up. This is going to be, make sure this shaker is on an instrument track. So make sure this guy is the full 8 bars. Here we go. So closed hat had its own instrument track. So will the shaker. It's really cabeza, but Cool. So now that that's down here, we can go ahead and group it with the rest of the percussion. So probably doesn't need this high pass filter, to be honest. I think this was generated, pretty sure this was generated with like filtered white noise anyway, so it's like double filtering it, but whatever. I'll just do it anyway. So I'm panning this to the right slightly because the second closed hat is, the sample itself is pretty much panned to the left. So this is, once again, we're creating different stereo information, but still keeping things balanced across the left and the right. So I sometimes like laying a tambourine on top of the open hat, although I may not do that now. I'm trying to think what else I want to add before going and finding some loops. So this is where it can be really fun to also create your own drum kits out of existing drum loops that you can find. This is one of the ways in which you can take a sample and almost mangle it in a way that it's either unrecognizable or you're making your own kit out of it. And FL has the best built-in slicer, I think, out of any digital audio workstation out there. So one of the ways we can do this is if I go here, let's just find some sort of, I guess, percussion loop. Let's see what they have. That actually sounds pretty good. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to right-click on this and open a new slice section. What it's automatically going to do is it's going to find where the transients are, and it's going to cut them, and then it's going to put this in the piano roll. So if I played this the way it was, it's going to be now a time-stretched, but not time-stretched in the traditional way where you're kind of dragging everything out. So what it's doing is it's spacing out the individual hits to be in time with the tempo, which is different. But it's also allowing me to kind of create my own drum kit out of this loop. So if I listen to just the loop, now is what I can do is play. I mean, it sounded okay, but I might pick a different loop. I'm liking the way that's sounding. Once again, just something unique, something different, something that's going to sit well on top of. A lot of these other loops are going to have a lot of the same elements that I already have, so I'm looking for something a little bit different. Don't like that sound. So let's go ahead and make a variation. Let's start with that. So with these loops, sometimes what's also helpful is putting an LFO tool on them, just to kind of help it groove with the rest of the drums and of course the kick drum. And that can also help with things like this to once again give it movement. So let's go ahead and try that and see what that sounds like. So if we listen to it with the kick versus so once again, I may go and try to find another loop. I'm liking the way that's sounding. So make a second one. I repeat the process over. Let's hear what this sounds like. Lots of really interesting stereo information. There's a lot going on here. I'm really liking how that's sounding. Whoops, this is going to be loop 2. How many times can I spell it wrong? A couple, apparently. Give it that icon, and here. Zoop. Some low-end information that it's not that I'm not a fan of it, I just don't know if it fits so right now. liking the way that sounds as well. So, whoops. Let's go ahead and add that in for our third loop and probably our final loop, unless I have a change of heart or I think there's something missing. So we already have shakers. We already have a lot of things kind of filling out that spectrum there. So I don't know how necessary it is to really have more than this or even this many, to be honest. It's just about, you know, when do you reach the time that you're happy with the way it's sounding. And although I'm already happy, I think this is a different sound that's going to help, I don't know, sound unique. So we're going to give this an instrument track. Just going to route it to the percussion bus. And so it may also help having that LFO tool on it. Maybe not that much, but enough that it's going to be sounding interesting. And same with this guy, but we'll see how much we need. Maybe just slight, but I don't know. I like kind of the way that it has the syncopation that you can hear at the beginning. Once again, just playing with those, whatever percussion instruments those are to kind of add movement. So let's just listen to the loop that we have so far. Once again, to me it sounded really good and I like the way it's coming together. One of the things I may actually do is create a perc loops bus just for these three before routing them either to the master or to the percussion. Not only can now we control the volume of all these loops together, but we can apply any processing that we want to do. Once again, I'm going to just give this an icon, and actually I've had a change of heart about, what the heck, or that default color. Why would you do that? That is new color picker. Oh, that's probably what it is. There it is. Okay. So once again, each little piece kind of having its own way of adding movement and adding life to the loop without it kind of being too overbearing or too kind of crazy, because all this percussion is going to be helping add the drive. It's not going to be the main section of the, like, it's not going to be the main force behind the track, I guess is what I'm trying to say. For instance, when we have everything in, whoops, which helps if I actually have this there and doing that. when we have everything, we don't want it to be overpowering. We just want it kind of in the background, adding groove, adding drive. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's very important to the track. It's just, also you don't want it to be distracting. You know, you want every element to have its place and to not stand out too much and have its spot to shine. Once again, there's no pads, there's no bass lines going on besides the sub, and it's already starting to sound like it's coming along really nicely. So once again, there's a lot more we need to do, but just in that little bit, just with that percussion groove, you know, nothing's really mixed besides the percussion maybe with each other, but nothing really mixed with the leads or anything. There's some more processing I want to do on the sub, but all of that stuff coming together, in my opinion, is sounding pretty darn good so far. So with that, I may stop this video, and hopefully we'll pick this up soon, where I'll be kind of improving upon that even more, and maybe we'll get to adding, I don't know what I'd want to add next, maybe some pads, and maybe some other sounds, maybe start working on the breakdown, and then in addition, of course, adding those bass lines and effects throughout the track that we can start using the arrangement to our advantage when kind of adding risers and things like that. So thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all soon.